This is Anish Chauhan and this is Equilibrium Security. It's time to tackle your biggest cyber security challenges head on. Hello everybody and welcome to episode 22 of our Cyber Hot Seat. This episode is called Reframing the Paradigm, Understanding the Human Side of Security. And, you know, as a title, I think it's really great and it really sets out what it is we're going to be speaking about today. And my guest, who I'm really, really pleased to have joining us on this, is Jonathan Craven. He's our independent consultant for data privacy and cyber security. And I'll let Jonathan introduce himself, but he's had a fairly extensive career across the public sector and internationally in a commercial capacity. And, you know, Jonathan, your specialization is kind of compliance and the approach to compliance and getting organizational culture right, which in a nutshell sounds really easy, doesn't it? But it's anything but.
Yeah, well, thanks, Anish. Great to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's one of those things that lots of organizations get wrong, and it's sadly it's something that we all kind of need to do to some degree as governance and compliance, and certainly once you get to operating in very, very heavily regulated environments such as financial services or healthcare or things like that, is that it really, really starts to bite. So yeah, it's something that has always been around for most organizations in some capacity, but if anything, it's really ramping up of late.
Yeah, for a whole host of reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Sure.
But if we were to, like, I always like to start, you know, I like a lot of analogies. Anyone that kind of knows me, I always have energy. If we just start at the very top and reframe the kind of picture of the paradigm of organizational security, how would you? Well, I suppose the question is, where do you start? which we could take up a couple of hours just doing that.
I was just going to say, yeah. How long have you got? I think from my perspective, it's the shift from focusing very, very heavily, if not solely for some organizations, on technology to a much more holistic approach to organizational security. And I think as the title of the podcast suggests, this is focusing, from my perspective, very heavily on people and actually what role do they play in your organizational security. And by that I mean the subject matter experts, so the people who are working in your infosec teams, who may be working in your data privacy teams if you have those, or working legal, general governance, risk and compliance, risk management, all of those kind of things. How do those functions all work together from a subject matter perspective? But also, and I think for me this is kind of the elephant in the room really, is how do you get everybody else in the organization on side? And I think that is a huge perennial problem for most organizations, is that actually the people that know what they should be doing do what they should be doing.
Yes.
And therefore, in terms of like security behaviors and compliance behaviors, the people who are the subject matter experts, more often than not, are behaving in the manner in which you want them to behave.
Sure.
And therefore, I think the where we come back to this initial question of how do we change the bigger picture? How do we look at this slightly differently? I think it's from moving away from the idea of we've got lots and lots of technology, we've got lots of tools, and therefore that equates with organizational security, to say, well, actually, technology is one variable. And it's a big one and it's a very important one, but it's one variable in your organizational security picture. And therefore, for me, the bigger picture today in 2025 and forward is actually whole organizational security has to be a whole organizational approach.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's really, really good way of summarizing that, because I think it's almost, is there a degree of technology was the be all and end all maybe a decade or more ago, but now that, not to say that the technology side of security is sorted, because it never will be, but it becomes, in as the picture grows, it becomes a smaller variable. So is there like a misconception that, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but is there a misconception around technology, or are there any human factors that are being overlooked that you kind of want people to almost unlearn?
I think you kind of alluded to it in the question, which is the reliance on technology and
Yeah.
this
Okay.
presumption that oh, if we have enough tools, in there is a number which is enough tools to make us secure. And
Okay.
I think for me, that's a misconception.
Okay.
Is that no amount of technology alone will make
hmm
any business secure.
Okay.
They can all move towards that sort of hallowed ground of where you want to arrive at, but none
hmm
of them individually are going to bring you to that point on their own. And I
Yeah.
think largely that's for a couple of reasons. Is first and foremost is how is that tooling implemented in your business?
hmm
Is it implemented the way that is optimum for your business?
Okay.
So not all tooling is created equal.
Sure.
There are horses for courses,
Yeah.
and I think that one of the things we now understand in this incredibly complex and ever expanding like tool sprawl that a lot of
hmm
organizations are increasingly finding themselves in is you can have a tool to do pretty much anything,
Yeah.
but if they're not being implemented in a coherent framework within your business,
hmm
you're not being utilized, they're not being utilized the correct way. So you're not
hmm
using tool X to do job Y, you're using
hmm
tool X to do job Q. And in fact, it's not really the best tool to do that job.
Right.
You're trying to
Yeah.
make things fit.
hmm
And also, and again, kind of leveraging the people aspect of it is are are all of your staff interacting with that technology in the way that is going to get the best results out of it? Because if they're not, and I suppose it depends very much what the system is, but if they're not, then you you may have a degree of sort of error inherent in the use
hmm
of that tooling. So if your presumption is I've got this suite of technology, which is our organizational security approach, and we rely on them and we believe that they are 100% accurate and therefore we are 100% secure,
Okay.
I can't help but feel that you're setting yourself up for a fall.
hmm
And I think therefore that going back to your initial point on this, I think that tooling now moves into a or should move into a position of being a variable
Yeah.
and a very important one, don't get me wrong, because
hmm
I think particularly, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about this, but particularly when we're talking about sort of threat scanning and mitigation and reaction times and things like that, when we are looking at a lot of AI driven tooling over the last few years, is that
Yes.
they are responding to more threats more quickly, more
hmm
accurately. That can only be a good thing.
Yeah.
But it is a part of a solution, not the whole of a solution.
Yeah. And I think that's where people's uh understanding of what the capability and why a tool is there to do something has kind of started to change. And on that note, it we hear it a lot, and it's a comment that's been bandied around for many years now that people are the weakest link in any organization security. And I
Yeah.
think is that mindset holding people back. And what I mean by that is by saying, well, we have all the technology and all the processes and everything are absolutely perfect, but it's the people that's the problem. Is that attitude is what's holding organizations back from moving forwards, would you say?
I I think that it plays a very very like serious part in it.
hmm
My opinion about it is that simply characterizing the wider staff group in your organization,
Yeah.
and I will for the purposes of the question, I will deliberately exclude those subject matter experts who may work in your security team, for
Sure.
example,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
like that. So everybody else in the business, if you characterize them as being the problem,
hmm
I think you are doing two or three things, all of which are counterproductive to your security approach. So,
hmm
number one, you are creating an us and them between the security team and the rest of the staff.
Yeah.
And therefore, you are straight away disincentivizing them and demotivating them from engaging in any kind of security strategy, simply because you're saying, we think that you're stupid and you're not capable of doing it, and therefore you need to leave it to us. And therefore they go, okay, well, we'll leave it to you then.
Yeah.
And what is I find slightly ironic in that is that I have never met a security engineer or a CTO or whoever, it's sort of anybody in any business who says, yeah, I've got enough people in my security team. I've got enough people to do all of the work and to horizon scan for any potential threats and to secure the infrastructure and do all of the daily business and all of the extra bits. So on the one hand, you're saying that you don't have enough people in your security team to do everything that needs doing. And on the other hand, you're alienating everybody else in the business who could potentially help you.
That's really interesting that you make that comparison between those 2 points, actually. Very interesting. Yeah.
So I think there's automatically and blanket characterizing everybody else in the business outside of the security team as being part of, or indeed the whole problem, is a real misstep from my perspective, simply because I think it's a misrepresentation of what the reality is of the situation. And secondly, I think you're kind of hamstringing yourselves if you're in the security team and going, right, we don't want any help. We don't want any help from the rest of the staff in the organization, because that kind of implies you can do everything perfectly yourself, which frankly you can't. No. And that's not necessarily any comment on people's ability. It's more to do with how many pairs of hands you've got.
Yeah. And I think it's because, you kind of, you almost want to flip it from making staff and employees and everybody else the part of the problem. Actually, they should be part of the solution. We need you. It's almost suggesting that we can't protect our organization without your input. Therefore, we need you to be on side, and these are the things we need you to help us to do. And it flips it, doesn't it, completely? I think if you take that approach.
Yeah, and that's certainly what I advocate to a lot of my clients. That's why I also lecture at a university on cybersecurity. So I'm talking to undergrads about what they're going to do in their careers in cybersecurity. And this is one of the big things I'm talking about, is saying, actually, you need to engage with everybody in the business, not just your immediate colleagues in a security team, because they are going to be the ones who are actually undertaking most of the risky activities.
That's right.
So they need to be properly educated and made aware. They need to be given the right tools. They need to be showed how to use those tools effectively and appropriately. And they need to become your partners in that organizational security approach. And I think, very much to your point, I very much echo that, which is people are part of the problem, but they are also a big part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've perfectly teed me up for the next point I was going to bring up, and that was about in the current day and in the current climate and the current day and age, I think we are very much, well, I think I'd like to think as an industry we are more considerate of neurodiversity than some other industries. I'd like to think we are. But every employee learns and engages and is able to disseminate and take on information differently. And you throw neurodiversity into that, and it kind of makes it even more of a point. How can organizations ensure they don't leave anybody behind? Really, I think anyone who does listen to this podcast regularly, I do bring these points up reasonably regularly, regardless of what we're talking about. But hopefully, it's important to understand that people and culture and learning is such an important part of everything that we do as a in cybersecurity. But how do we ensure, from your perspective, Jonathan, that we don't kind of leave anybody behind?
I mean, I think this is really key to a lot of what I talk about. And I think it's about awareness, education, training, all of those kinds of things. And I think it all circles back to one word that I tend to touch on a lot, which is culture. And I know that it can be bandied around a lot about organizational culture and this, that, and the other, security culture and risk culture and sort of compliance, all those kind of things. But I think what it means is what is your general approach to it in terms of how involved everybody is, of how aware everybody is, and how much of a participant everybody is in whatever that thing is. So I think from my perspective, how do we ensure that we are as inclusive as possible, and we don't leave people behind, to your point? I think there are a couple of approaches there. I think first and foremost is a very, very basic acknowledgement from an organization as a whole that they probably have a very, very diverse workforce. And I think that feels like it should almost go without saying, but actually sometimes I think you need to say the quiet part out loud and go, actually, a full and sort of proper recognition of diversity of your staff group is really important to a great many things, but particularly to what we're talking about here in terms of education and awareness. So I think there's that. I think that there is, in my experience, the training, awareness, education around cybersecurity, data privacy, all manner of compliance issues to do with compliance is generally quite poor. And therefore it's very much box ticking. It's very much has this person done this PowerPoint in the last 12 months? And therefore, have they done the multiple choice quiz, the answers to which have been the same for the last 4 years, which means they can guess it. So actually, what are you teaching them here? What is their, how are you raising their awareness? What are they learning? And the answer is nothing. They're not learning anything they didn't already know. And so I think there has to be a real conscious effort to move away from that. In doing that, I think you have to make training and awareness raising much more group focused and business function focused and organizationally focused. So it's no point sort of just randomly trotting out. I mean, the number, for example, the number of data privacy organizational training packages I've seen which spend 75% of the training package taking people through the nitty-gritty of what the UK general data protection regulation is, and to be brutally frank with you, it's like they don't need to know. They don't need to know.
No,
they need to know what it is, and then and the key thing is they need to know how it impacts what they do on a day-to-day. And I think that's the real key in terms of making training really relevant and make it business relevant and function relevant, so people can go actually apply it as part of their day-to-day. I think also looking at what people do in their day-to-day business activities and going, okay, let's look at those processes, those business processes, and you can look at somebody, I don't know, let's say they're in a call center, and you go, right, what are the processes that they go through? What touch points have they got on anything to do with cybersecurity or data privacy or any of those things? And then look at that process and say, can we optimize the business process so that we make it more inherently compliant and more inherently secure? So are there any touch points where they can be using technology, for example? So a really good example is like customer contact centers and things like that. If they're doing a lot of calls, if they're particularly doing a lot of emails and things like that. If you've got a problem with data breaches, you've got emails going to the wrong recipient, you've got data leaving the organization and going to the wrong people or the wrong place, or you're sending the wrong data to people. So it's like all of these kind of things is actually there is technology that you can have. So like email client overlays, which basically say when you're trying to exfiltrate data from an organization, and you may be doing it entirely legitimately, so that's not to characterize it straight away as being a bad actor. So you're trying to send something to somebody else in another organization. If it's outside your organization, your data classification protocols can kick into place on an email. You add an attachment to the email and it says, right, should this attachment leave the organization? Straight away, and it can flag up and go, hang on a minute, are you sure? And then it can go, okay, you're actually sending this to people outside the organization. Are you sure you wanted? So all of those kind of little helping hands along the way that can are really kind of like optimum usage of technology to assist in those daily business processes and optimize those business processes. And I think another thing with that is in terms of the education and awareness raising is a huge aspect of it. I think is the increasing blurring between people's business lives and people's home lives in terms of their security posture.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that lots of organizations really have to wake up to,
Mm-hmm.
because I think if you are characterizing an employee as being they are your problem to look
Mm-hmm.
after
Yeah.
as somebody working in the security team, they are my problem from 9 a.m. till 5:30 p.m. while they're
Mm-hmm.
operating in our systems and accessing our data. And
Yeah.
I'll go, you're wrong. You're flat wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Simply because if all you're bothered about is making them more secure and making them more compliant
Yeah.
within those hours and within that confines of Monday to Friday operating on those, then how do you expect them to do that if they operate in a way in their personal life where they are deeply, deeply insecure
Yeah.
on when they're operating on social media, when they're quite freely sharing passwords to people, while they're giving out data left, right, and center? How on earth are you expecting them to be a different person when they're at work from the person they are at home?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because we often say that, if someone can smooth that differential between work and home, they're much more likely to understand why they need to do what they need to do at work. And the moment you see people making that correlation between home security or good security in their personal lives to work, they're immediately much less of a risk, and they're certainly much more bought into why they need to do what they need to do.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think the best examples I see of sort of education um, around cybersecurity particularly,
Hmm.
but just general protection of your own data kind of
Yeah.
things, is making it relevant. And that's not just relevant to your business function, like your
Hmm.
day-to-day business processes,
Yeah.
but actually to your personal life, and saying,
Hmm.
so for example, do you have kids? You're clearly, if you have kids and they are of an age where they are operating on the internet, then
Mm.
surely you want them to be safe. And what measures do you put in place to ensure that their safety and security when they're operating online? Similarly, you go to the other end of the age spectrum if you've got elderly parents
Hmm.
and or elderly relatives, and you go, well, actually they might be more at risk because they might be more at risk of being scammed or
Hmm.
phishing emails, those kind of things. And therefore, how do you make them more secure? So again, making all of these things much more personal and more relevant
Yeah.
has a huge impact on people. And I think, to your very much to your point, it makes people more bought in, and they
Hmm.
go, okay, I get it now. I
I get it.
understand what's in
Yeah.
it for me. And I think
Yeah.
that's a huge part of the problem that security teams have with getting staff engaged with any sort of strategic security approach, is simply because people, I say this with a degree of consideration, but they don't care. And
Yeah.
that's not because they
Yeah.
want the organization to be insecure. It's because they think it's not my job, and
My
therefore
problem.
it's not my problem.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, if you say to them, everybody in the business has a role to play in the organizational security approach, and some have a bigger role to play than others. So your security team is more involved and takes up a bigger proportion of that involvement. But
Mm.
actually, every single person in the business can help. And I think once they start to appreciate that, and certainly if you can make the security awareness training and their education around security approaches much more personal and much more relevant to them,
Yeah.
they're much more likely to buy in and go, okay, I get it now.
And
And
this is
I
what it
think,
means for me. Yeah.
well, do you know what? That's really key, because I think it's part of a sales pitch. Let's have it
Uh-huh.
right. It's part of a sales pitch. We have to
Yeah.
sell security to everybody
Hmm.
else in the business. If
Yeah.
we're paid to do it, it's like, well, it's my job. I'm getting paid to do it. So
Yeah.
I do it because I'm getting paid to do it. When
Mm.
somebody in a call center earning minimum wage is like, it's not my job. I don't
Yeah.
get paid for it. It's not my
Hmm.
job. So you
Yeah.
have to go, okay, how do we make it important to them? And the buy-in comes when you go, there is something in it for you, and the thing that's in it for
Hmm.
them is being more secure generally. So
Yeah.
actually, if you position your training about security and almost make it like business agnostic. You almost just go,
Mm-hmm.
this is better security. It doesn't matter whether you're at work or at
Mm.
home. It's just better security.
Yeah, it's almost
Then
like
there is they have a vested interest in doing it.
they do. Yeah, and I sometimes make the analogy to health and to healthy eating and looking after yourself. It doesn't matter where you do it; it will just benefit you. You know, and
Sure.
security is like looking after yourself to some degree, isn't it? It's
Absolutely.
like, you know, you wouldn't only eat healthily at work and therefore go, oh, I'm not at work anymore, I'm going to go and eat whatever
I like. Yeah.
whatever
Yeah,
I like.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think, you know, part of this issue that we see is that technology plays such a big part. You know, cybersecurity, even in 2025 and almost 2026, it's still talked about as being an IT issue, you know. And is that because there's from your perspective, Jonathan, is it still because there's an over reliance on technology? Are organizations still buying into the fact that there's a product, there's some technology that's going to keep me secure? Of course, it's a part of it. It's a big part of it. But we are, you know, more and more of these conversations that we're having now is much more about the people and the culture. But how do we move organizations? Well, I suppose a two-part question is, do you agree that organizations are still today still too heavily reliant on technology? And if so, how do we move that reliance? How do we move the focus?
So to answer the first question, yes, broadly speaking. Some
Sure.
organizations are better than others, but I think
Mm-hmm.
yes, broadly speaking. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I think that due to the point we've kind of mentioned before around lack of education or awareness or lack of training or poor training, I think that there are lots of people in organizations who are still deeply sort of ill-informed when it comes to all things to do with organizational security and cybersecurity. And therefore, I think that can massively impact their engagement with it, simply because they're like, well, it's not my problem, and it's not something I need to do. And I think therefore it's I think organizations have to pick this up, simply because there are so many people in businesses that still basically think it's a problem that they don't understand. And it's very scary in that respect, and therefore they rely very, very heavily on tooling, because, and I think again, it's almost like a bit of a elephant in the room, but I think there are a huge number of people operating at C-suite level that still haven't got a Scooby-Doo when it comes to cybersecurity. They don't know. They don't know what the threats are. They don't understand it. They don't understand what the solutions might be. And therefore, they want somebody to make it go away. And therefore, if somebody comes to them, their IT director or CTO or whoever it is, CISO goes to them and says, give me 50 grand. I'll buy that tool. It'll make all your problems go away. They go, great, fine, solved.
Yeah.
And therefore, there is an over-reliance on technology, but I think it stems largely from a lack of understanding and a lack of engagement as a result. I think that, and I say this with a degree of consideration, because I'm not trying to say all vendors are bad, but vendors do have a part to play.
Of course.
Because vendors always want to sell you the next silver bullet. And no vendor I've ever met has ever held the hands up and gone, "No, we can't make you 100% secure."
Yeah.
Because it's not feasible. It's not realistic. No vendor's ever going to tell you that, because they'd never sell anything.
No.
So I think there's an element of the industry itself actually creating a slightly unhelpful environment, simply by virtue of the fact we're saying, yes, all of this technology is going to make you 100% secure.
Yeah.
And I think therefore you end up in a situation. And again, I've sat in those meetings with boards before where they say, well, why do you need more money for more security tooling? Because the last thing we gave you 6 months ago, you said that was going to solve all of our problems.
Everything. Yeah, exactly.
So again, you get this kind of almost this level of distrust of, well, actually, hang on, is this why do we need more tooling? Why do we need more tooling? What's the new technology for? What's the new? Oh, okay, all right, fine, make it. And there's just, again, this lack of understanding and awareness. So and I think that's that's key why there is this huge reliance on technology and an over reliance on technology in a lot of situations, simply because there isn't enough knowledge. There isn't enough knowledge about what's out there and how it can be leveraged properly. So to flip on to the second part of the question is, how do I think we change that, and how do I think we move it on? Is honestly, we have to start having much more open and frank conversations about organizational security across the business. And it's not, it isn't an IT problem. And I think you have to really stand up and challenge that. If somebody says, oh, well, cybersecurity is an IT problem, no, sorry, that's dead wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that has to be key to the change, to the mentality shift that we have. And that mentality shift has to happen across the organization, because let's have it right. It doesn't matter what kind of business change you're trying to do. If the head doesn't agree or understand, then you're not going to get the top-down buy-in.
Correct.
And if you're not going to get the top-down buy-in, you're not going to get the money, and it's not going to change. Nothing's going to change. So I think that there has to be, again, an appreciation that I think part of the misunderstanding for a very long time is, by the time you reach C-suite level, you know everything about everything. And it's like, no, they don't. I think you have to say,
or they're immune, or they're
exempt, or actually it's not their problem. It's like, well, no, it is their problem. It is, and they don't. To be clear, it's not that I'm expecting your CFO to know everything about cybersecurity, but actually, it would be very, very helpful if your CFO could have a conversation with your CISO or your CTO, whoever it is, to go, this is all the systems I use. This is what what's the underlying infrastructure? What's all the data we house? How do we process it? What do we need it for? What's critical? What's less critical? And then go, what are the risks?
Yeah.
What do we need to insulate ourselves for? What mitigation plans do we need to put in place for disaster recovery and business continuity? Or having those kind of really, really frank, transparent conversations at all layers of the business, from the C-suite all the way down to your interns and your junior level roles, and this kind of stuff. And also, I think it's just about having, and again, it kind of circles back around to the culture point, is actually implementing and developing a culture within your business where asking questions about security is not a bad thing.
Absolutely.
Having concerns, having queries is not a bad thing, and in fact should actively, in my opinion, should actively be encouraged.
Yeah.
Because if people are curious, if people are asking questions, then they are much, much more likely to be engaged, and they are much, much more likely to actually spot things. Because I think in the most successful businesses I've seen in terms of reporting cultures, whether it's to do with data privacy and data breaches, whether it's to do with cybersecurity issues and phishing and all those kinds of things, and malware and what have you, the best, most effective reporting cultures are those that leverage really, really good, well-implemented technological solutions alongside a really, really healthy conversation across the business of, I've received an email, I'm a bit unsure, can you just tell me if it's okay? For example. And I think having that kind of two-handed approach of saying technology absolutely has a place in addressing these issues, but it's one tool in the toolbox, it's not the whole toolbox.
It's not the whole toolbox. No, exactly. No, that's really a really good point. I'm going to move away from this point a little bit, because we can't really talk about cybersecurity and culture without talking about AI. So obviously we're talking shocker. I brought AI.
Shocker.
So obviously there is an encouragement, whether it's official, whether it's unofficial, whether it's just people taking the path of least resistance, of staff and people and individuals to use AI for productivity, because you don't have to go very far to be told that if you're not using AI, you're falling behind, or if you're not using AI, you're not making the most of your hours and what you need to do. But at the same time, it's an enormous data privacy and exposure concern, right? So how can organizations balance innovation with risk?
Okay, so I think a lot of organizations hide behind the banner of innovation so they can get away with some fairly sketchy things. And I realize that's a rather sweeping generalization,
Okay.
but I think what it is that they can, to coin a phrase, it's kind of like, it's okay, we'll fix it in the mix. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, just get on and do it, and we'll worry about the legality and what might happen or might not happen somewhere further down the line.
Yeah.
So I think that's not necessarily malice aforethought. What it is probably it's sloppy.
Sure.
It's probably not very well advised,
Mm-hmm.
but it's one of those situations where you think, okay, I get why it happens. And certainly in circumstances where there can be demonstrable benefits to using AI in terms of productivity, where you can demonstrate, you go, okay, we have a fairly manual business process. We can plug a particular AI algorithm into it, and we actually reduce the time taken to do that process down from 1 day a week to 1 hour a week. And you go, great.
There's specifically well thought out though, isn't it? That's the key there, isn't it?
And I think that's, for me, that's kind of the key is how well thought out is it?
Yeah.
In terms of your implementation of AI tooling. So I think if there is a drive for innovation at the expense of everything else, that's a problem. Yeah. I think if there is an absolute blanket ban on the use of AI, regardless of whether it's useful and secure or not, is equally problematic, because I think both of those positions are kind of polar opposites, but I think they are equally unhelpful. Because if it's a flat no all the time or a blanket yes all the time, then actually neither of those approaches is particularly secure. You're saying, well, because you're basically opening the floodgates and letting anything in, and really you're not checking and not scrutinizing it, which is clearly not secure. Or the alternative being is you may be missing the opportunity to leverage technology which would help you. And therefore you would be more secure, and you fall behind, to use your phrase, from a security posture, simply because you're refusing to use something which is absolutely fine and legitimate for a particular scenario. So I think having either of those kind of polar opposite views is problematic. Therefore, I think if businesses want to start using AI and want to encourage more staff to use AI, I think that's absolutely fine. However, I think first and foremost, you have to have a really robust understanding of what your business functions across the piece are.
Yeah.
And at what points in those business functions could you sensibly insert an AI into it to make that process more efficient, quicker, more productive, cheaper, whatever.
Yes.
And I think so you're developing use cases. And I think once you get to a point of developing a robust use case, you can then risk assess it, and you can go and you can assess it from a regulatory and legislative compliance perspective. You can risk assess it from a cybersecurity perspective, a data privacy perspective, all of these kind of things. If you have something that's very clearly outlined as we're going to do X with Y and then Z will happen.
Yes.
You can risk assess it. If you're just like, well, we want to jam AI into a thing, and it's like, well, what for? We don't really know. It's like, well, you can't risk assess the unknown.
See what happens. Yeah.
So I think there's that there needs to be more stricter controls on we're just trying to jam it in just because everybody else is doing it, and it's fear and it's FOMO basically. It's like, oh well, we don't want to miss out. And I think there is a bit of, in a strange way, there is a little bit of stigma attached to if you're not using AI, you're falling behind. It's like, well, to an extent, but actually, if the business process that you do, and I think again, sometimes the way that it's being positioned is it's either the case of you use AI in this business process, or you're clearly operating in the Stone Age and you've got a slate and you're trying to scribble drawings on it. It's like, come on, actually, let's be real.
It's not as black and white.
It's not as black and white as that. And what we're talking about here is potentially a lot of stuff which is functional. So it's either mass data analysis, it's highly repetitive procedures
Yeah.
that are with very, very prescribed data, those kind of things. You go, well, that's where there are clear benefits to using
Yeah.
AI, because you can vastly speed up those processes, and you can sort of drastically improve the accuracy and the productivity and the efficiency and effectiveness of those procedures. So I think that's fine. But then again, you've got very, very clear guidelines, and you've got
Yes.
very clear processes around that. And so I think it's about just being able to be patient, and while they understand that there is this real strong drive for sort of fear of missing out, and oh god, we've got to do this, that, and the other, and crikey, and actually saying, well, that's fine, but if you can't give me a legitimate use case for AI within your specific business function, your business process, whatever it is, then really you shouldn't be jamming it in. And I think the other part of it is understanding with any is, are you developing the algorithm yourself? Is it something you're buying out off the shelf? Because then there are different considerations around, for example, IP. Are you putting IP into it? So, for example, if you want people to optimize slide decks for internal presentations or even for client presentations, you go, okay, we are jamming a lot of sort of commercially sensitive information into these slide decks, which in itself is fine, but you don't then want to chuck your slide deck into the free version of ChatGPT and go, oh well, can you come and optimize my slide deck? Because then when in the background it's going, thanks, I'll ingest all of that data.
On that, that's almost like, oh, sorry, Jonathan, you were going to say something else.
It just I think it's about having sensible conversations, about having frank conversations, because in all of this stuff is where we see shadow AI and shadow IT prior to that, and all those kind of things, is because people feel they can't talk to a security team or the IT team because they're in fear of getting told off that they've done something wrong. They don't feel very well supported. They don't understand. So they're asking for guidance, but they're a bit scared about asking for guidance. They're not really sure. Or their business process is so ridiculously clunky that, and it's not been looked at for 15 years, and somebody in I don't know, his finance is still doing something on their desktop on an Excel spreadsheet that should have been migrated into a bespoke system for that 10 years ago. And that is inherently insecure, but nobody's really taken appreciation. You don't necessarily need to jam AI into that. What you need to do is go, is the system and the application fit for purpose first, and then look at the process and go, could we optimize this process in any other ways, one of which may be the application of AI. So I think it's about just having a much better understanding across the business, and having those conversations across the business of going, it's okay if you want to try it out, but can we try it out in a secure protected environment? So, for example, if the business has access to AI algorithms, or to any of these things, to automation or these kind of things, it's like, well, have you got business versions of them? And therefore, can you turn around to an internal business function and go, great, if you want to use X, here's our internal version of it, which we know is secure, we know isn't sending the data somewhere it shouldn't be sent, and hopefully will give you much more insightful and appropriate responses, simply because it's in-house. So I think it's just like stuff like that, and give them the tools that they can use. Then therefore they're much less likely to try and find a workaround, because I think that's, from my experience, the reason why shadow IT and the and shadow AI occurs is because people go, I think I could do this quicker that way,
and therefore they take a path of least resistance.
They take a path of least resistance. So I think the path of least resistance approach is a really interesting one from a behavioral psychology perspective, simply because what you're saying to people is, actually, we need to look at what you do every day, and we want to make the optimal process. We need to make that the path of least resistance. Because then you're going to do it automatically, as opposed to putting so many. I mean, the number of times you see problems arise and shadow IT arises as a result of friction. It's literally just they get to a point of going, this is too hard doing it this way. There is an easier way, even though it's not the prescribed way. I'm going to do it the easier way because it's easier for me.
Because either it's possible to do it that way, or the other way is just too difficult. Yeah.
100%.
And actually, on that note, we do see a lot of attackers are choosing the path of resistance themselves, aren't they? By targeting suppliers. So from a attacker's perspective, they do go to the using that terminology, the path of least resistance.
Sure.
I'm changing the subject slightly here, but it is about those cyber criminals. They're not attacking those big organizations. They're doing it through the smaller organizations because of they themselves are poorly protected. So if we think about the organization, if our listeners right now are thinking about themselves, okay, well, we're secure, we have the right culture, we don't have any our processes are all efficient, we're using AI in the right way, everything is all good. But then the big kind of oversight here is possibly the supply chain, because they might be looking at well, we are fine, but we're communicating with a small organization who doesn't have the ability, the time, the money, the resources, the knowledge, the expertise to be able to implement on themselves security. So what kind of advice can we give there in terms of how do they think about their supply chain in the context of everything we've just spoken to, but extending it to the supply chain?
Yeah, I think primarily over the last 5 years, what most people working in IT security have seen is two things. Firstly, they've seen a lot more than two things, but two things specifically on this topic. One is that the attack surface that you have to protect for most organizations has increased exponentially. Due to large numbers of staff working remotely, due to a much higher incidence of leveraging SaaS solutions, all of these kind of things. Is your attack surface has just drastically increased,
exploded, really.
Pretty much. So I think that there's that, and then also I think that because more obviously, and I say 5 years because that relates specifically to COVID, and I think obviously a lot of people now have virtually everybody that went to work remotely at that point in time, and still a huge number of people and a huge number of roles still work on a at least hybrid basis, if not totally remote basis. And therefore that we are unlikely to see a return to the days of your attack surface being literally the physical perimeter of your building, and you've got all your devices within those four walls, and all your servers are on-prem and all that kind of stuff. It's very much like, actually now you haven't got tangible hold on most of it. So I think that's a really, really key bit. How that relates to the supply chain thing is that makes your attack surface increase even further, because you have to have this consideration of going, well, I'm secure, but what about them? Now, to be absolutely clear, that's not saying you need to take on responsibilities for your suppliers simply because that's not practical.
No, of course
not. But again, I think it very much comes down to having those conversations with suppliers, and particularly more recently when we are looking at things like business email compromise, attacker in the middle, those kind of things, is that they are not looking to attack large organizations, because they know large organizations have got a lot of money to spend on security in most cases, and they have a lot of staff to dedicate to it, or resources to dedicate to it, generally speaking, and therefore it's harder. So ironically enough, to use the same phrase from the previous question, they look for the path of least resistance, which is, let's look at the mom and pop store or the mom and pop business, which is it's only got 6 headcount. Nobody really knows anything about IT, and we can probably get in with them very, very easily, and then they work their way up the food chain. So I think there has to be a really serious consideration from large organizations when they start looking at the supply chain. I mean, you only need to look at some of the large public sector organizations, and they may have hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers.
Yeah.
And obviously some of those will be business critical and some of them will be less so. For example, if you're working in a hospital, you've got whoever is the software supplier for your electronic patient record is business critical. The guy who's supplying you the toilet paper for your hospitals is well, actually, you never. I don't suppose you ever say it. That toilet paper might be business critical, so I might catch myself there. But I don't know. Yeah, but printer paper. There you go. Printer paper is probably an easy one to go. But I think so. Once you start to really scope out what the scale of your supply chain is and what the vulnerabilities are. It's about probably having some good governance built in there. So are you doing vendor management when you onboard a new vendor? Are you making, are you requiring them to have some kind of cybersecurity accreditation? Are you asking for ISO 27001, Cyber Essentials, something like that? Are you saying you have to have it? Because that gives us a degree of reassurance that you're doing things properly. Do you put that in contracts? That is an obligation of a supplier is to do that, and I appreciate it's kind of a bit of a double-edged sword, because really what you're doing there is you're de-risking yourself, because you cannot
almost relinquishing it's almost seen as like relinquishing responsibility by saying I'm just going to push all the emphasis onto you as a supplier.
And I think but I think that's fair to an extent. I think as long as you kind of say within any contractual relationship, we will keep our own house in order. You make sure
we need
you
to do the same.
We need you to do the same. And I think that's realistic. Now, I think depending on the size and scale of the business as a supplier, as I said, if it's like a one man and a dog business, and it's for a £25,000 contract for a multi-billion-pound corporation, you're like, okay, we can probably apply a different, proportionate level of security scrutiny to them. We're not going to expect them to be ISO 27001 compliant because it's not realistic, but we might ask them to do some fairly basic kind of cybersecurity accreditation that they can be. And also, actually, something I have seen in some particularly very large corporate organizations is their IT security teams actually reaching out to suppliers and going, do you need any help?
Oh, that's interesting.
With getting cybersecurity accredited, because to be perfectly honest with you, I think this is a real problem for a lot of small businesses. So and it's not, ironically enough, it's not just like the mom and pop store thing, but actually, if you think, let's take healthcare as an example. There is an explosion of startups and scale-ups in healthcare technology who are operating on a basis of them probably being 2, 3, 4 headcount, maybe up to a dozen tops.
It's not uncommon at all. No.
And the vast majority of those people are going to be either clinicians or ex-clinicians or developers, and perhaps somebody to do sales and marketing and that kind of thing from a commercialization perspective. Guess what you're not going to have? You're not going to have someone who's an IT security expert, probably. You're not necessarily going to have anybody who's got any experience in governance and compliance. So actually, from a large organization's IT security stance, if they say, right, we've got this supplier and we know they don't have any headcount to do IT security, but we are requiring this of them, then actually,
why not help them?
If we throw them a bone and go, here's the thing you can. So as I said, something like Cyber Essentials is a really, really good example, because it's a very, very well established baseline accreditation for
achievable.
It's achievable, and it's very modestly priced at the self-assessment level. So actually, you're not asking for the moon on a stick. No. If the company that, as I said, it's only a very, very small contract they've got with you, it's £10,000 or £20,000 for whatever the size of the business. If you're asking them, we need you to be ISO 27001 accredited, they'll go, no, bugger off, because at the end of the day, it's not financially viable. It's not worth it. So I think if you've got something which is much more achievable, much more modest, and you can give them a little bit of a steer and a little bit of a helping hand,
much more likely to adhere.
they're much more likely to adhere to it. But actually, that improves your security posture as well. So again, there's kind of, it's a win-win. So I think really it's about having that visibility down through your supply chain, making sure you're having those conversations, you're doing good contract management and vendor management, you're not onboarding a supplier and then not checking in with them for 5 years about whether they've actually updated any of their systems or applications, and just having that degree of scrutiny with them and those conversations with them to go, if you have a data breach, for example, or you have a ransomware attack or anything like, you do realize you have to let us know. That kind of thing. And it sounds, again, it sounds really, really obvious, but I think largely speaking, it's about just having some common sense conversations and having the environment where you can have those common sense conversations with a degree of impunity.
No, that's really good. I really like that point, actually, Jonathan. It's not one I've heard before mentioned in any real depth about just helping your suppliers meet your own requirements. It kind of makes perfect sense, really. So we've covered off some really, really good points, and we could easily, go for another hour. But if people listening to this right now are thinking, okay, we are a little too security focused, maybe we need to shift a little bit the balance towards people security, and we need to think about a supply chain. What kind of main top 3 tips would you give our listeners as the key takeaways from this conversation as a roundup?
I think first and foremost, you need to security teams need to take a long, hard look in the mirror. And almost going back to the very start of our conversation today and go, actually, rather than the staff being part of the problem, am I part of the problem?
That's a really good point.
Have I got too narrow a view of this? Have I got are my views too fixed? Am I too inflexible? Am I willing to change? Am I willing to adapt to new approaches and new technology and new methodologies? Am I willing to let the rest of the staff group in to help me? So I think that's almost that kind of self-awareness of saying, are we contributing to the issue here, or are we actually helping it? I think a second thing is, if organizations are largely reliant on outdated training, if you are simply trotting out the same PowerPoint to your whole staff group for data privacy, for cybersecurity, for any kind of legislative or regulatory compliance activities, any of that kind of stuff, and stop doing that, and start looking at what is more functionally relevant, what is more personally relevant to staff, and there are a huge number of there is an increasingly large number of vendors out there who are offering these kind of things in terms of how do you and I use this phrase with a degree of consideration. How do you sell cybersecurity internally? And it is a sales and marketing strategy. And actually, I think that there are, and this kind of goes on to my third and final point, which is get the right people to do the right things. And I think, funnily enough, when we're talking about organizational culture, when we're talking about changing messaging, when we're looking at changing training and delivery of education and awareness raising and those kind of things, is I think we need to be really honest with ourselves, and that there are lots of people who operate in the IT industry who, by and large, and again, I mean this with the greatest of respect to every single one of them, and I include myself in this group as well, but we didn't necessarily go into it because we were really, really comfortable talking to people and presenting and doing and delivering training and doing all of those kind of things. So organizations need to stop making it an IT security analyst job to create and deliver IT security training. That is absolutely ludicrous that loads of organizations are still going, right, IT security, it's your problem, it's your bag, you do it, you deliver it. More forward-thinking organizations are looking at engaging with their internal comms teams, their marketing and sales teams sometimes, who are able to deliver stuff in that much more engaging way. They use mixed methodology. to your point earlier about neurodiversity, about having an understanding from your people team, from your internal comms team, of how do we deliver these messages differently but appropriately to all these different groups of staff that we have within the business. So it's actually saying sometimes some of the stuff to do with IT security shouldn't be done by the IT security team because they're not the best people to do it. And that's no criticism of what their abilities are. It's just saying use the right tool for the right job. And just in the same way as you want to use the right piece of security tooling for the right security job, you want to use the right people within your business to deliver those messages the right way. And actually, we need to move on from this idea of saying your IT security analyst needs to be a technologist. They need to understand infrastructure. They need to understand AI. They need to understand security tooling. Oh, and by the way, they need to be a teacher as well.
Yeah,
it's like no, it's crazy. So let's again, and I think that's kind of the, if I can end on that point, it really is about just having these more frank discussions internally in our industries, in our businesses, and go, look, are we getting the right people to do the right job? Because if we're not, then we're just making an issue for ourselves.
I think that's a great final point and a great summary, Jonathan. I'll just really say that, look, I really appreciate you having the conversation with us. It's been really intriguing. I've found it fascinating. I found it really interesting. Even though we touched on a lot of points which we may well have touched on before, or even for me, it's just a slightly different take on some points that we already understood, but still super interesting and super engaging. So, Jonathan, thank you very much for being on this episode, and hopefully maybe we'll have you back on again soon.
Thank you, Nish. I've absolutely loved it, and I would be happy to come back anytime. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Cheers.